revolution of sound with the latest electronic music.
Make the ground shake.
With nothing to hold us back, these are the songs of the wild.
Hey everyone, what's up? Today marks our 250th episode of Monstercat's weekly radio show. And wow, that is crazy when you think about it. That is 250 weeks we have gathered in so many different corners of the world to listen to some amazing music and, of course, hang out with some great people. So today's episode is dedicated to this community for coming this far. No matter what day of the week it is, what platform you're listening to, use our hashtag COTW250, and tell us where in the world you're joining us from. Of course, if you're feeling fancy, include a photo of yourself listening to today's episode. All right, let's get some new releases, a ton of community mashups, and, of course, some unreleased records. So let's get this done right here on Monstercat's Call the Wild.
Where do we go from here? Have we gotten lost? I'm starting to think we're out of touch. When did it disappear? Settled in with the dust. Forget what it was that made us us. Walking backwards, losing focus. Slip so slow we didn't notice. Never read the warning signs. But it doesn't matter where we're headed. Made our plans, we're gonna get it. Cause I got your hand in mine. So where do we go? Where do we go from here? Highs and lows, all that I know is that I'm gonna follow you wherever you go. Wherever you go, my dear, need you the most. And I wanna know, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Where do we go? I'm looking for the road, eyes on the sky, taking it one step at a time. I know that I'm not alone, yeah, we'll be fine. Taking it one step at a time. Walking backwards, losing focus. Slip so slow we didn't notice. Never read the warning signs. But it doesn't matter where we're headed. Made our plans, we're gonna get it. Cause I got your hand in mine. So where do we go? Where do we go from here? Highs and lows, all that I know is that I'm gonna follow you wherever you go. I've been sitting here for too long. I'm stuck in my bed. I'm not tired, I'm trying to find out what's wrong. Time has passed on without a call. It feels too weird to ring up. I had cashed out by feeling love. Too soon to care, to keep up. I'm so far up in hush. Ignored for a reason. So hard to please, a state of mind. I'm trying, I'm in no rush. So hard to please, a state of mind. I've been out falling in touch.
Craziness spills over to other names. We are already seeing that the chaos has spun out from just GameStop and AMC. Now, Bitcoin is having its own, an already volatile cryptocurrency is having its own wild day. And there are other stocks that are having similar issues too. So, you've just seen it spiral way out from GameStop into other parts of the market.
So as you continue to cover this story, okay, what are the angles you want to know about? What is it that you're kind of watching for, especially as we're wrapping up this trading week, but we're going to get ready for a new trading week and a new month next week. What are the angles and stories and, issues that you think we need to be kind of sensitive to?
I think we'll absolutely have.
Hi, my name is Ethan Perry, and I am a UX designer. Most of my clients are in the financial, tourism, and automotive.
So that's one thing. And then the other thing I guess I would watch is how short sellers have been affected. I mean, we saw Citron Research put out today that they're no longer, publishing short positions.
That was
That's
huge.
Huge decision. And
so not publishing or not taking,
forward.
Just not publishing.
I mean, it's kind of upending their strategy for the past 20 years. It's a huge turnaround for them.
Well, how does this make other short sellers think about this? Because as you know, a lot of people pointed out to on Twitter today, Mark Gongoloff from Bloomberg Opinion, we talked about this earlier today on Quick Take. Short sellers have a role. They have a role in exposing fraud and exposing wrongdoing at companies. And there's some great examples of short sellers doing that. I mean, we think Enron, we think Wirecard, and more.
That's right.
And the format always, or the typical format that we think of is a short seller, has a short position and then does a big reveal and then the stock sells off. But, as we've seen when people on Reddit plan out in the open,
Robinhood raises $1 billion after traders revolt.
If this can happen regularly, short sellers might have to rethink how they go about that entire business.
Yeah, I mean, it's just pretty amazing. And things are just have moved so quickly. Annie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Bloomberg News investing reporter Annie Massa. Check out all of her work on the Bloomberg and at Bloomberg.com because that's a thing. Like we talked about Hertz last year, and I think we were like, oh, but now we've seen a lot more names, and it's just the cycle. Cycle has been happening much more quickly.
And I think too, like more widespread implications.
Totally. I mean, it's really
Bloomberg School of Public Health.
This is a global pandemic, and what we've seen with some of the variants that are emerging is anywhere that the virus is replicating unchecked sets up a situation where the virus can mutate and change and evolve and perhaps get around more of these vaccine-induced immunity. So we have to keep an eye to the global pandemic and realize that it's to all of our benefits to knock down virus replication more of these vaccines across all countries and not leave areas where the virus can smolder and mutate and change and perhaps render our vaccines less useful.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Recapping S&P down 65, down 1.7%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. We are up to date when it comes to business news. Let's get you up to date with what's going on when it comes to COVID-19 and more specifically the pursuit for more vaccines because we've got some big news from J&J today. In fact, it's our top story on the Bloomberg in the past hour. Johnson & Johnson's one-shot vaccine generating strong protection against COVID-19. They did, Tim, a large late-stage trial, raising hopes that it can rapidly reshape a stumbling immunization campaign. We know the rollout has been really tough, but you've been pointing to the numbers, preventing 66% of moderate to severe cases of COVID-19, according to the company, particularly effective of stopping severe diseases, preventing 85% of severe infections and 100% of hospitalizations and deaths. That's the number you've been focusing on. And it's a big one. All right, let's bring in our guest. Paul Stoffels is vice chairman of the executive committee at J&J, also chief scientific officer at J&J, and he joins us on the phone, or actually I should say Zoom, from New Brunswick, New Jersey. We also do want to welcome our Bloomberg TV audience who are joining us at this time. Paul, it is so nice to have you here with us. First of all, thank you so much and welcome. Talk to us about the findings. There's some different statistics in terms of the efficacy. What is it that we need to zero in on, and what's really the most significant in your view?
So we did a very large study of 45,000 people in the US, South America, and Latin America in a totally different environment where now huge transmission, but also many variants are present.
Because when you talked with our David Weston last fall, Paul, that's exactly what you talked about. 1 billion doses you anticipated for 2021. So that's a real number. You expect it. And can you give us an idea of that 1 billion dose rollout? What does it look like over the next few months?
Yeah. So at the moment, we are setting up many manufacturing plants in late stage. We are getting approval from different regulators in the world on that. So it's in full upscaling. And as we will deliver 1 billion over the year, it will be region by region, country by country. We work with the government to discuss on how much will be available when, and we'll communicate that. But we are confident that we will be able to provide 1 billion in the course of the year.
But what does that mean then? I mean, obviously you've got to get the emergency approval. So give me an idea of what the timeline is. I think we're all kind of fixated on getting the vaccine so that our life can get back to normal. So what does the emergency approval process look like? And then when do you actually anticipate getting vaccines into arms, and then at what rate?
So we will submit a filing next week. So we noted the data now for 3 days. We worked on it, we finalized. That's what we published today. Next week we'll submit, and then the FDA and EMA will have to do their work. The European as well as the US agency will start their work, and most likely towards the end of February we'll have an advisory panel pending, of course, decision of the FDA, and then we'll see getting approval, emergency use approval, and then in March we'll be able to start delivering vaccine.
So you think a realistic timeline for us to actually receive Johnson & Johnson single-dose vaccine would be March?
It will start in the month of March. There also with the US government, we have made an agreement over this for 100 million vaccines to start with, and we'll keep up to that agreement to be able to deliver that.
I'm wondering how you see this shot being used in the context of this, as you call, pandemic recovery toolkit, you know, especially fitting in with the mRNA vaccines that we see from Moderna and Pfizer as well. The rollout of those has been really tough here in the United States. There have been a lot of speed bumps, but you don't have to keep this one at a temperature for a very cold temperature for a significant period of time. I mean, there are a lot of differences here. How do you see the rollout working in the context of these other vaccines?
Well, you point at the right thing. It's a single dose, so with one shot you get this protection starting day 14, and the immune matures at 28 and even longer, so that goes fast. And then it has 2 to 8 Celsius, which is normal refrigeration temperature for stability for 3 months. So we can distribute in the country at normal refrigeration, which allows to get vaccinated.
Getting stuck sucks.
And a handful of stocks, including GameStop and AMC, move higher. What do you make of the phenomenon that we're seeing? What do you make short squeeze is nothing new on Wall Street. Short squeeze is nothing new on Wall Street, but what do you make of this phenomenon we've been seeing this week?
Yeah, well, it's a great week to have me on, because there's a lot to talk about, and certainly we've seen short squeezes in the past, but I call this one the grand awakening. The best thing that we can come from this is the education that hopefully so many people will come to appreciate. You know, seeing this mass chat room chatter do something that we've never seen before is a little bit reminiscent of the Yahoo chat boards from the 1990s, but this is something totally different. And I know that unfortunately there's going to be some people that will lose money as a result of this trade. But even us as professionals, as good as we try to be, there are occasions when we make trades that go against us. And I'm just very, very enthusiastic and optimistic that we'll have lots of additional traders and a lot more transparency into this market. But what a week, Alexis?
What a week is right. We're still trying to wrap our heads around it, and it may not be over yet. I mean, we know that we have hearings coming from Capitol Hill regarding the frenzied trading that we've been seeing. And earlier, we actually had Robinhood CEO on, Vlad Tenev. And one of the questions that we asked him was whether or not he was prepared to testify before lawmakers. And he said he believes his platform is doing the right thing. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Everyone at Robinhood operates this company with integrity and first and foremost looking out for our customers, the individual investors, and their best interests. Of course, we are constantly in communication with our regulators and with lawmakers, and we continue to do so. And I look forward to having conversations with anyone about this because I think obviously it's highly technical and involves settlement mechanics, as you guys saw in some of your other conversations. And I think Robinhood made the right decision here.
Now, Kevin, I know you're not a legal expert, but you're in the markets. This is what you do for a living. You hear that. How does Robinhood, you think, have investors' best interest at heart when they're telling them how they can trade particular stocks? I mean, basically, they said you can only, for a short time there, they said you can only sell GameStop, which to my mind makes me think they're looking to go and protect the hedge fund billionaires who've been shorting the stock and make money when it drops.
Yeah, it certainly seems a little hypocritical when you listen to it from his perspective. It's still a new platform. I think it's a platform that's engaging lots of new investors, both of which are learning as they go. I think the regulation that can come from this will only be more healthy to make sure it doesn't happen again in the future. I think with Robinhood specifically, it was a liquidity issue for them as a firm, maybe not something that he was doing proactively to help the hedge funds or the larger traders. Certainly the Reddit crowd has identified them and is doing a yeoman's job in keeping these prices higher. But from Robinhood's perspective, it's not a free platform. They pay for trades. There's order flow dollars that certainly go back and forth in a big way. But the regulation shouldn't just stop at the traders. The regulation shouldn't just stop at the chat boards. I think the regulations also need to look and shed a light on short selling, because when you can short more shares than exist in a float, then I think you have a real problem there. And having some of these regulators look at how short selling works or doesn't work, I think can also become a very, very good outcome as a result of any future legislation.
Do you think we might see rule changes regarding how much an individual investor can buy on margin? Do you think that would be a helpful way to sort of put a cap on this going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that before. I mean, even in the 1929 crash, you were able to margin 90% of your portfolio. Here, it's been a little bit more along the lines of 50%. But I think margin is something that should be regulated. From an investment standpoint, I don't think that's taking away any of our rights. We can invest everything that we have, and we should be able to do so. But margin requirements should be governed, in my opinion, and I think they will be.
You brought up liquidity with Robinhood. That's a good question, and I think a lot of traders are very concerned about it. I mean, they had to draw down their credit line. They had to raise $1 billion overnight. If you were a trader trading on that platform right now, would you be inclined to move your money off of Robinhood?
Well, we're not traders on Robinhood, so I certainly wouldn't want to comment or say anything negative about them, because I think that there's so much good that's being done by education for younger investors. I know my son's in high school, and he's been talking about GameStop for the past 3 days. So I think anything that gets people excited and involved, wanting to learn more about the markets is a positive. As far as order flow, even yesterday when they were down for purchases of some of those names, there's other platforms that traders could have gone to, Schwab, Interactive, Fidelity, E-Trade. I'm certain that they were available for execution all day long. So I think the educational concept that Robinhood is supporting is something that I would support. And not trading there for institutional purposes is probably somewhat obvious, but I'm rooting for them.
All right, we're going to leave it there, leaving it on an optimistic note. Kevin Simpson of Capital Wealth Management, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Alexis.
Okay, next up, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, joins us to talk about President Biden's plans to reopen our schools in the next 100 days.
slide, please.
Dr. Anthony Fauci is weighing in on President Biden's push to reopen most schools within 100 days. Joining me now is Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers and a friend of the program. Randy, good to see you. I know you spoke with Dr. Fauci last night at an event you were hosting, your union was hosting along with the National Education Association. So does Dr. Fauci think we can get schools open safely in the next 100 days?
So Dr. Fauci is in favor of, Joe Biden's proposal, which is to open the majority of K through 8 schools for in-person learning with the appropriate CDC and other guidance in the next 100 days. But Dr. Fauci himself said, absent mitigating circumstances. So, you hear a lot of, if. So in English, what this means is that if the new variant doesn't do to us what it's doing to South Africa or Great Britain, then we actually have a lot of scientific knowledge from the fall about how to reopen schools safely for younger kids and for kids with special needs if there's no low or moderate COVID, if there's not more than low or moderate COVID in a community. And that was good for people to hear. And it was really good for people to hear him being clear and plain spoken about that, about, what those safeguards are, about vaccines. He talked very much about the need to get teachers and other school personnel of the vaccines as quickly as possible. He talked about how testing plays a role, and obviously masks and physical distancing and ventilation. So I think on balance, it was great to have Dr. Fauci yesterday. But what is really going on is that we are fighting two battles right now. One, we're trying to tackle a virus. And two, we are fighting fear and frustration. Huge frustration that the virus has seemed to have taken over all of our lives for a whole lot longer than anybody had hoped or feared. And number two, because of all of the misinformation that's out there, there's a lot of fear, and you can't debunk fear by telling people what to do. You have to debunk fear by meeting people where they are and really getting them the facts.
And Randy, I know that you wrote an op-ed for USA Today in which you outlined why testing is critical to getting the schools open, even before vaccines are made widely available. Do you feel like are there enough tests out there, number one? And number two, are the schools prepared to do the amount or the volume of testing they're going to need to do to get schools open?
So the answer to both questions right now is obviously no. I mean, because if it was available, people would be doing it already. But I have a saying that so many other people use as well, which is where there's a will, there's a way. So instead of health departments who are, yes, underfunded, saying, oh, no, it's not my job, they have to intersect with schools and have a testing and a contact tracing process set up like New York City did. And, when New York City started it, you and I talked about it, months ago, it was rocky, and there's still some rockiness, but that really works. And the testing stuff is so important because 40% of COVID spreads asymptomatically, maybe even more. And so what testing does is it lets you see what is unseen. When you get a rapid test, it's going to tell someone, yes, there's false negatives, there's false positives, but in the main, it's going to say, if you have a positive test, that means you have COVID in your body. And that means you should not be out and about because you can disseminate it or transmit it to people. So if you do what Raj Shah and I suggested, which is you have 25 to 50% of a staff tested once, twice a week, and 25 to 50% of kids tested once, twice a week, then what you're going to see is what's coming in and out of a school. And that is what has kept everything, that's what has kept the rate of transmission really low in schools in New York. Obviously, that plus mask, physical distancing, ventilation, and the cleaning.
How do you envision testing going down for the students? And you're saying that perhaps weekly or biweekly for maybe teachers and staff.
It has to be. It has to be with students too, or we have to say to parents, look, if this virus, like if you knew that just by taking somebody's temperature, you would know whether, that's a sign whether somebody had a virus or not, then you wouldn't have to go to something more invasive as testing. But the testing is not as invasive as, a PCR test. Sorry, I'm a social studies teacher, not a scientist, which was like the swab really all the way up your nose. This is kind of like a small swab. People can take it at home. You can't get into the White House without a test. I bet you can't get into your studio without a test. Can't get into most industries without a test. And so this would have to be until we tackle the pandemic and have herd immunity in terms of vaccination. This is going to have to be just the part and parcel of how we keep kids in school. It's the protection that's needed.
Are you envisioning the testing being done by the school, by nurses in the school, by the parents? I mean, I know this is sort of getting into the minutia, but in order to make this thing really work, right, you got to get into the minutia. So how are you in conversations you're having with others?
So what happens in New York City, for example, is they have a testing van that comes up to the school, and then they just test, 25%, in that week they test 25% of the kids and the educators. Everybody has given consent. So, and that's what they do. And people get the results back. They're supposed to get their results back within the day, because it's useless if you get your results back, 2 or 3 weeks later. There's other ways of doing it. For example, I was in the White House last week. We tested, instead of what Trump used to do is have the testing at the White House themselves. What President Biden is doing, is that they have a relationship with CVS. And, you go to a place in Washington, you get your test, you hear within 2 hours whether or not you're negative or positive, and you wear an N95, and if you're negative, you can go into the White House. And that's what, so there's different ways of doing it. Private schools got some of that PPP money from the COVID relief packages before. They have set it up as well. Sometimes they have a nurse do it. Sometimes they have the health department. So there are different ways of doing it. But the new tests are easily administratable. And so a nurse can do it. The health department can do it. You need personnel, because you also need the contact tracing. But it is key in a period of time when we're trying to do something that's so important as opening schools and keeping people protected. This way you see what is unseen. And that's why the Rockefeller Foundation and we have proposed it. And Dr. Fauci last night, obviously a better explanation than me, because he's such an incredible scientist. But, that is, part of the kind of tools of protection so that we can reopen schools for students safely for the adults and the students that are in that building.
All right. Randy Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers. Best of luck with all your endeavors. Thank you for watching.
We're trying. We're really trying.
We know. Thank you. On behalf of the kids, thank you. Coming up next, WeWork eyeing a trip to go public. By what other way but a SPAC? We've got details for you coming up. It looks like WeWork will not let the dream of going public die. In fact, the company is now taking a second shot at it. And Yahoo Finance's Sabine Marcellus is here to break it down. And of course, they want to do it now via a SPAC, like just about everybody else does, Sabine.
Exactly. SPAC seems to be the new way to go, going public 2.0. So basically, WeWork, we had seen them in 2019 try to go public. They failed dramatically. Seeing the company try to do it again via SPAC. Now, this time, WeWork is seeking a valuation of $10 billion. Back in 2019, at the high end, the valuation was $47 billion. But at the time, the funding rounds were being led by SoftBank, the Japanese conglomerate. Now, SoftBank has not disappeared. They're still involved with WeWork. They're still the majority owner of WeWork, but they actually wrote down the valuation of the company to $2.9 billion because of the pandemic. But that's not stopping WeWork from still trying to go public and get a valuation of $10 billion. Now, nothing is written in stone, so we'll see how this works out. But we're seeing a lot of companies trying to go public, preferring to do it via SPAC than a traditional IPO because it is cheaper. Now, if you look at the numbers, there were nearly $75 billion raised by 219 SPAC IPOs. Now in 2020, but now in 2021, there are more than 80 SPAC debuts, and it's still January.
Oh my gosh, it's only January, and look at all that's been happening. All right, thanks a lot, Sabine. That's another one on our list to watch, perhaps coming public this year. Let's take another look at the markets, shall we? Because there's been a sell-off all day long, even though we are seeing a big pop in those speculative stocks. GameStop has been up about 60% today. So has AMC after Robinhood raised restrictions on how you can trade some of those stocks. Here we have the three major indexes off their worst levels of the day. We're going to have much more straight ahead here on Yahoo Finance Live, including more on Robinhood. We had the CEO on earlier today talking about how that company believes that it did the right thing by individual investors, and also more on the new J&J vaccine trying to make its way to market. More after this.
GameStop soars as the broader market sells off. We have the Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ all set for their worst weeks since October. And this, of course, coming as the VIX, that's the fear gauge index, records its biggest weekly gain in 11 months. And it's the Reddit rally that's unnerving investors. GameStop and AMC surging once again after Robinhood lifts restrictions on these heavily shorted names. The CEO of trading platform Doe helps us make sense of the trading frenzy. And data out from Johnson & Johnson shows that its single-dose vaccine is 72% effective in the U.S., but just 57% effective in South Africa. So what does this tell us about how well it protects against COVID-19 variants? J&J's global head of R&D is here to explain. It's a critical final hour of trading as we wrap up what has been quite the week here on Wall Street. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live. I'm Shauna Smith.
And I'm Adam Shapiro, and as Shauna just said, it is critical as we head toward the closing bell. Want to keep your eyes on a couple of stocks right now. Moderna, not Johnson & Johnson, but Moderna, because shares of this stock, they popped today. They were up more than 5%, then up at about 10%. Right now, they're trading up around 7%. Almost 8%. Here's what's going on. So we learned the news about Johnson & Johnson. We're going to be dealing that throughout the show today with their vaccine, not as effective in the real world, perhaps as Moderna and Pfizer. So Moderna shares got a pop on that. There's also new data out of Israel, which leads the world in inoculations. That data shows the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines may actually be, are you ready for this, more effective than first thought in those initial studies. So I want you to know, too, the 52-week shares for Moderna, they've been between $17 and $196. Then there is American Airlines. There's a lot going on with the airlines today. American reported yesterday. Today, they're selling off. They're off by about 6%. Couple of headlines to keep in mind with American. First, there's the Reddit Wall Street Bets crowd. They are trying to do a short squeeze here. They got a pop on Thursday. The shares were up this week about 8%. And on Thursday, just yesterday, they skyrocketed. Part of what was going on here, too, is the fact that Doug Parker over at American in the earnings call talked about the need. Are you ready for this? More government help, because this is the second payroll support program for the airlines will expire in March. By the way, United Airlines just said about an hour ago that 14,000 jobs are threatened if the airlines don't get more assistance from the federal government. This is just a way for me to say we got Delta CEO on next week. And of course, we're going to be asking him about that. Don't forget, too, American Airlines, they lost $2.2 billion in the last quarter. Shauna?
Certainly, we'll have a lot to talk about next week during that interview. Adam, I'm looking at two stocks that are under pressure, Jay. First, let's take a look at Caterpillar. Now, not, I guess, relative to the rest of the market, it's holding up okay. Caterpillar off just around 0.5% right now. They're out with earnings. Their earnings per share coming in at $2.12. That was well above the street's consensus. But to put in perspective for everybody, it's a 22% decline from what they reported a year ago. Revenue, though, coming in line with expectations. Caterpillar did not give 2021 guidance, citing the, quote, continued uncertainty due to the pandemic. You can see some of that reflected in today's stock price as Caterpillar drops along with the broader market, but Caterpillar shares off just around 0.4%. Then switching over to Eli Lilly, they were also out with quarterly results. They beat on earnings per share and revenue. Profit was $2.75. Sales of $7.4 billion. The results driven by COVID-19 antibody treatment, also their diabetes drugs. Yet you're seeing the stock under pressure right now, off just around 1%. Eli Lilly initially was up on these results before falling with the broader market. So it's two big names here to keep on your radar. But we need to get to the story of the day, and it's really been the story of the week, and that's the short squeeze that's underway. Retail traders today stepping back in after yesterday's losses, sending names like GameStop and AMC up just around 50% right now. Jared Blickery, help us make sense of where we are at this point.
Ooh, we need a lot of help there because there's so many dynamics to this. We've learned so much this week. T+2 settlement, I think that happened in the last 24 hours. Haven't hit rehypothecation yet. Repo market, that's always in vogue. But let's go straight to the charts here. I'm kind of kidding around, but this is a serious matter because we have options expiration into the close. This is a weekly options expiration, not the monthly. But you look at this heat map, there's a little bit more red than we're used to seeing. Adam was talking about American Airlines. That's down 6% today, well off of its highs from Thursday's open when it was up over 80%. But also GameStop, that's up nearly 50%, 344% over the last 5 days. And you got to be wondering how many shares are going to get assigned over the weekend into Monday from those call options that all the Wall Street bet buyers have been buying to their accounts. So is this going to continue into next week? Possibly. But let's take a look at the sorted performance. Here we have costs up the most. That's up 1,900% this week. This is over the last 5 days, followed by Blockbuster Video up 1,233%, well off of its highs as well. And then GameStop up 350%, AMC, Express, they're just a little bit less. But you get the picture here. We had the CEO of Robinhood on a little bit earlier, seemed very cautious about what he was saying. I commend him for coming on the program here, as well as all the other news networks, to make his case, because some of these guys, they just go into hiding. But nevertheless, this is the story of the day, the week, probably not the year, but we're going to be following this into next week. Should be interesting, guys.
Certainly will. All right, Jared Blickery, thanks so much. We want to stick with this, and for that, we want to bring in Victor Jones. He's the CEO of Doe. It's a commission-free trading platform. And Victor, it's been quite a week, as Jared was just outlining there for us. Let's just step back for a minute, because Doe at first chose not to restrict access to these heavily shorted names like some of your competitors did. I understand that there was a brief interruption on your platform yesterday because of the clearing firm temporarily went closing only, but just help us better understand, I guess, the past 24 hours from your viewpoint and the decisions that have been made.
Yeah, look, we have said, and we've been trying to communicate as often as possible with our customers, our position on this. We believe in free and fair markets, and we don't believe in that as a catchy marketing slogan. We believe in it as principle, and we had some difficult decisions to make, but we stood on those principles yesterday. And it is correct that we chose to allow trading in these underlying names. And we feel with our education, with our support, the fact that people can get a hold of us in under 2 minutes, the fact that we're doing 2-hour live streams to really clearly articulate what a short squeeze phenomena is, what is short interest, and help people understand that if you step back from the hype for a second, let's remember what these businesses are. When's the last time you went to a movie theater? When's the last time you bought a pair of Koss headphones? And when's the last time you actually bought a physical cartridge or game and traded in new and used video games? So I think, we've been doing our part to address this through education. And I think there's been a lot of people trying to really articulate the very difficult factors in decision making. And there are many, right? Capital structures, capital requirements, trading risks. But at the end of the day, the customers want to be heard here. And this generation, shares everything. They share their cars, they share their homes, and they feel like some people aren't sharing the wealth here.
So quick question for you. Help us understand, because my eyes, it's like algebra again when I'm trying to comprehend options trading. At one point, the short squeeze comes to an end because those who borrowed have replaced the stocks. Short interest dies off as those who are, entering into put contracts are not going to be so eager to go there. And the call options are going to have to expire because at some point you won't need to replace the shares you borrowed. Can't you measure when that's going to hit and that this phenomena with GameStop comes to an end?
You can. I think really a lot of the people are looking at their option risk. You have pin risk on the board. So I think a lot of the brokerage firms are looking at that, and that probably fueled a lot of their decisions. For us, 90% of the activity in this underlying name was coming on the stock side of things. And while our activity has increased, the reality was people were more upset with not being able to trade these underlying names than actually the desire for it. And so we actually, while the activity, was increasing, we're only talking about maybe 1,000 orders over the last couple of days.
Hi, Jared Blickery here. Just want to get your take on the margin and the leverage embedded into the system here. It used to be in the old days that you could open up a margin account. You had to have $50,000. Now you can do it with practically nothing. What's your firm's take on leverage? How freely do you dole it out? And are you revisiting any of these strategies here?
Well, here's the way that we approach this topic, which is you can utilize options for speculation. You certainly can. You can also utilize them for risk mitigation strategies. I mean, how many people come on this program and they talk about stretch valuations here at these particular levels? And there's a way to look at the options market and say, I could get some potential upside here. And if we do have a meaningful correction, which many people have been talking about, then my downside capital risk is much less. That is the way that we've been talking about utilizing option strategies, and that's what sets us apart. We do not want people coming in and just, really looking at the markets as a way to short-term change lifestyle. We want people treating the markets as long-term wealth creation. And that's why we've created the firm and our principles, as well as our priorities in the ways that we have. And if you're not there with the customers, if you're not giving them support, you're not able to answer questions in a timely manner, you kind of leave them to themselves, or you leave them to internet influencers, you leave them to message boards. And I think that's why it's important to have education as the guiding principle of how you're introducing new users to the markets.
Victor Jones, great to have you, and we hope to have you back again soon, CEO of Doe. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up next here on Yahoo Finance Live, Johnson & Johnson out with data on its single-dose vaccine, showing that 72% effective in the U.S. We're going to talk to J&J's global head of R&D. He's up next. We're back in 2 minutes.
And welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live. We've got roughly 45 minutes to the closing bell. The big news from Johnson & Johnson today about the effectiveness of their single-shot vaccine has caught everybody with an upside. We want to invite into the stream from Janssen Pharmaceutical, a subsidiary of J&J, which is producing the vaccine, Matai Maiman. He's Global Head of Research and Development at Janssen. And also Anjali Kamlani. She is the correspondent here at Yahoo Finance who covers COVID issues for us. Mr. Maiman, thank you for joining us. Want to ask you real quick. At this point, hypothetically, if J&J got emergency use authorization on Monday, how many doses are ready to be distributed at this moment across, say, the United States?
Yeah, maybe I'll begin with just a thank you for having me on. It's such a pleasure. It's a great day for everybody, I think. So our plan, though, we wouldn't be able to have an emergency use on Monday. So what we would
I get it.
It's
hypothetical, but how many doses? Because you've been producing at risk the vaccine before the news today.
We have. So our commitment is to give out 100 million doses in the United States by June. And I don't know the exact schedule of that, but it's important that we plan around what our timeline is. And it's likely towards the end of February that we would get emergency use authorization. And we'd scale rapidly from there. We've been producing, you're right, at risk for a long time. We have to learn to manufacture the vaccine itself and then learn how to fill drug product and get capacity to fill drug product. And we've been working flat out to do exactly that as fast as humanly possible. So there will be lots of vaccine at the time that we'll have an emergency use authorization.
Matai Anjali here. Looking at the vaccine efficacy, of course, broadly 66% in the US, 72%. But then looking at it from the protection standpoint of severe disease protection at 85 and hospitalizations 100, some people are pointing out that severe usually ends up as a hospitalization. So can you rectify that difference?
Sure. I think it's such a great question because these are protocol, very formal definitions, and sometimes they depart a little bit from how people use the words. So severe COVID in our definition were those people that suffered multiple symptoms, but to the point where they weren't necessarily seeking medical attention, but they felt quite ill and remained at home. All the way through being in the hospital, the ICU, mechanically ventilated, and unfortunately some would pass away. So what we did is we collect that broad category of severe disease, and we say we're 85% protective against severe disease. And that, by the way, and this is probably one of the most important points of our data set, is also true in South Africa. 85% effective in preventing severe disease in South Africa, where more than 90% of the strains are this problematic B1351. So, and then if we pick the subset that is just around those that needed to have medical interventions, like go to the hospital and all the things that could happen to you in a hospital or die, all of those subjects that had hospitalization or death were on placebo. 0 of them had vaccine.
When we talk about the virus evolving and these new strains out of South Africa, out of the UK, and out of Brazil, I mean, it really points to the fact that what we're seeing take place is these new strains are more contagious. I guess, how are you thinking about that, and how are you preparing for more mutations to take place when you're developing this vaccine and maybe future booster shots if needed?
It's a really good question. Like all these variants, the entire panoply of variants seem to have evolved in the last month or two in a major way where they've taken hold. And that may be because of the selective pressure of individuals having had COVID, and now the virus is under some selective pressure to evolve itself to replicate even in them. And so that's likely what's going on. The fastest way to respond is to give a vaccine that protects against substantial disease, severe disease, even with those variants. So that's why we're so excited about our data, because it does protect against having significant illness with COVID, even with these variants. You're asking, though, a really good question, like what about what's next? The best way to deal with this is vaccinate everyone as quickly as possible. It reduces the number of viral replications in the world and radically, therefore, reduces the chance of a variant popping up.
Matai, looking at the production question again, looking forward, within the first week after the EUA or even the first day, do you have any numbers right now to set what is going out the door? And then after that, what are the obstacles that you might be hitting to ramp up? I know there have already been discussions or reports about some manufacturing hurdles.
So we haven't had anything happen that was unplanned for. We've been working really hard for the last 6 or 9 months to learn how to manufacture this vaccine, and we are producing vaccine. I can't give you an exact schedule over days and weeks. It depends on when exactly that emergency use authorization comes in, but we do have vaccine, and we have a commitment from the United States government to purchase 100 million doses for June to do exactly that. And it's not all going to show up in June. There's a schedule. I just don't know it right now. It depends a little bit about when that EUA comes through.
And when we introduced you, we pointed out that you are the global head of R&D at Janssen. But I also want to point out to the people watching, you are a PhD in chemistry, which is where this next question comes from. Are we going to get to a point with COVID-19 where it's kind of like the seasonal flu? We'll get that inoculation every year, and it'll, for most people, be just a once a year. Maybe you get the flu, you're home for a couple of days, and that's it.
I think so. I think this virus does not mutate as frequently as the flu. So the frequency of a shot depends on 2 things. One is how durable your immune response is, and we're feeling really good about that with our vaccine. And second, how quickly the virus changes. Here, the virus doesn't change nearly as quickly as influenza. So if we do, in fact, get to a high level of protection and the immune response is really durable, Maybe it's every year, 2 years, 3 years. If it's really like shut down, then maybe it's less frequent than that. If the population is only partially vaccinated and the virus is allowed to replicate and more mutations show up, then you might have to have an annual shot. So it depends a little bit on how things play out over the next half year, most likely.
We appreciate the update. I think a lot of us are very eager to get a vaccine as soon as we can and are pleased with the results. Matai Maiman, Global Head of Research and Development for Janssen Pharmaceuticals, which is a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson. Thank you for joining us here on Yahoo Finance Live.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Coming up, Vroom Vroom race team owner and entrepreneur Michael Andretti on how he's taking advantage of the Biden administration going green, getting the green flag there with hydrogen fuel. He's up next.
The Biden administration's focus on clean energy is ushering in a new era for the industry. We want to talk about more about that with Michael Andretti. He's the co-owner of Andretti Group. He's also a retired race car driver. His name probably sounds very familiar to a lot of our viewers. Also chairman of Andretti Autosport. Michael, great to have you on the program. We have a lot to talk with you about today. But first, let's just talk about the new partnership that you've reached. You just reached a deal with PowerTap. You're bringing their hydrogen fueling stations into your network. Talk to us about this deal and why this deal makes sense for your company.
Well, we're really excited about it. It's a new technology that PowerTap has come up with where they can actually produce hydrogen on site. We own about 100 and some gas stations on the West Coast with, I think, 39 in California alone. And so for us, I think it works out really well. I mean, for us, it works out well, and also for PowerTap on distribution, because I think that at the moment is the biggest challenge for hydrogen is obviously getting it, and so that's where we're going to come in and hopefully not only be able to start producing it in all of our gas stations down the road, but also getting partners and to also to do the same thing. So we're really excited about this technology. I think hydrogen makes so much sense in so many different ways, as an alternative fuel. And, for us, we're really happy to be on the ground floor of it.
Michael, what you just said about all of that, I mean, it's plentiful, it's everywhere, right? Hydrogen, and the emissions after it goes through a device, water. So what's to hate about that? The question I want to ask you, though, comes out of my years covering the Indianapolis 500 when I was at a TV station in Indy back in the days when the infield was debauchery and fun. That was the 1990s. Why not have like the IRL, the Indy Racing League, or the Penske, group start a race with these new fuels? That would speed up adoption for those of us who are kind of novices, right?
Honestly, I'm pushing hard for that. I think hydrogen is a perfect fuel for that because you really don't have to modify your engines that much. You can use the current engines with some small modifications. So I've already put the bug in the ear of IndyCar, and hopefully they'll be looking at it down the road. I think this could be something that could be also in Formula One cars in the future. There's talk about that. So I think it's in the future. When, I don't know, probably 5 to 10 years from now. But I think to me it makes more sense than even electric, especially for a 500-mile race. So hopefully that's where it's going to go.
Hey, Michael, COVID's impact on IndyCar, you're the chairman of the Andretti Autosport. COVID clearly disrupted the 2020 season. How are you preparing for the 2021 season? And do you see any lasting effects from the pandemic on the sport?
I don't know about lasting effects. I think there's things that we're doing differently, maybe, just because, we've learned to deal with COVID and the way you do business. I think there's a lot more Zoom calls, for instance, going on. And I think we're learning that maybe you don't have to spend all that money traveling to do all these meetings and stuff. I think you can do a lot of it that way, so there's some positives that's coming out of it. But I think, overall, I think, is hopefully we can start the season and go throughout the whole season with having fans at all the races. And I believe if that happens, I think we'll be able to pick up where we left off.
Would love to keep talking Indy racing, but I got to ask you about the gas station technology you have, because it is about hydrogen and it is about investment. And we already have hydrogen vehicles. The technology's here. The difference, though, is usually you got to go to one of those big old tanks and then you fill it up. Whereas at your technology, you create the hydrogen on fuel at the location. Right. Do you own the patent for this?
No, PowerTap does, and we become a partner with them, and that's what got us really excited. It only takes up about less than 1,000 square foot at a station, and so the technology is quite easily, as long as you can get natural gas to help produce it, you can put it anywhere. So we're very excited and very bullish about it. We think this has a true future, and we're proud to be, as I said before, at the ground level of this, and hopefully this technology is going to take off and be a big part of our future, because hydrogen is in the future. I know they've done some big studies, and they say by 2050 that it's going to be, like 25% of the energy out there being produced. So, which is a big number in the trillions of dollars. So, I think it has a real future, and like I said, having the technology that PowerTap has, I think, is a great advantage.
Michael Andretti Group's co-owner. We wish you all the best. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Coming up next here on Yahoo Finance Live, Robinhood is under fire. Clients very upset about the trading restrictions that were put in place on GameStop and AMC. We're going to talk to the CEO, who explains what happens right after this.